I'm joined today by Malcolm Battle, basketball coach and educator at Bard Early College High School in Washington, D.C. And Coach, I'm curious to know first if you've ever had negative interactions with police that were unwarranted and very possibly related to your race. And if the answer is yes, if you wouldn't mind sharing a story or two on that topic.
I would say unequivocally, yes. If it's not a problem, the two that come to mind, the first one was, and it's common knowledge that I was a gunshot victim in 1991 in front of my cousin's house. And, as the paramedics and EMT are working on me, I remember vividly the policeman stopping them from loading me onto the ambulance. And based on the entry and the exit of the gunshot wound, I couldn't speak much. I was shot in the face and it came out my neck. And the policeman, was like, "Oh, I need to speak to him." And I'm lapsing in and out of consciousness. And he was very, very, very adamant that he was going to find out what hood I was from. What hood you claim? Where you from? Is it, who I felt like it was under the disguise of, so they could find out who might have been coming after me. But my thing was, I'm visiting my cousin. I got shot. I don't know who shot me. I'm from the neighborhood that my mom pays mortgage in on the other side of town. But hey, if you want to get your foot off the gurney, I would love to get on this ambulance so I can survive this gunshot to my face. But I felt like there was some, especially when I was able to fully recuperate, I felt like there was some underlying tones there. I don't think other nationalities would have been held to such a standard in terms of, this person is fighting for their life. Let me stop them and ask them what hood they're from. Like, I would love to have a conversation with other victims and see if that's a common occurrence. Excuse my language. I think it's bullshit if somebody tells me they've been asked that, especially someone of another ethnicity.
So it almost sounds like, rather than treating you as the victim of violent crime that you were, they were almost treating you like a suspect or a criminal, like somehow you shot yourself or brought it on yourself or something like that.
Yes, that's the way I felt. That's the way I felt. That's the way I felt then. That's the way I felt when I recuperated. That's the way I feel rehashing that story for you. I just felt that there was a lack of empathy in terms of, at the time I was 18. Here's an 18-year-old gunshot victim, shot with a 380 to the face, exit wound out the neck. Barely can speak. The paramedics are trying to rush him because, my life is in the balance, and your thought process, your empathy is in finding out what neighborhood I'm from. Yeah. The second one that stands out to me is around the age of 25, 26. On Fridays, a lot of guys in my neighborhood, or who grew up in my neighborhood that didn't necessarily live there anymore, we would convene at a buddy's house in his yard, catch up over the week, drink beers, talk, and then disassemble and go on about our evening. It just so happens on this evening, police crews are pulled up. They start questioning us about whose house it was. Somebody stated to them that the homeowner was inside. It was like, they questioned us about there was maybe a 12-pack of beer do you know it's illegal to drink and out in public in DC? I was like, you know, there was a conversation with another friend of mine about when we didn't know it was illegal. We in somebody's yard. They asked for IDs. Maybe after 20, 30 minutes, those that had IDs, they were able to stay. Myself and maybe 3 or 4 others were arrested for not having identification. Now, mind you, my identification was in my car. I didn't walk around with my wallet. It was in my armrest. Hey, officer, I can go get it. The 2 officers that were on the scene made disparaging remarks about, you know, if I ask you to fucking get it, nah, well then shut the fuck up. There was an exchange back and forth. Like I stated, 3 or 4 of us were detained. We were locked up, taken to 6th District Police Station in DC in our neighborhood. The thing that, even though that was a problem, what we come to find out later was, of course, you know, we're sitting out in lawn chairs in a buddy's yard. You know, it has the arms on it in the lawn chair, so your keys might be in the armrest, in the cup holder of the armrest. They came back, and if you left anything out there in this guy's yard, they came and got it, threw it in the trash. So when I finally was released, I went back to my buddy's house. Was like, hey, and my keys and my phone. He's like, man, they was picking stuff up. I thought they was bagging it for evidence. I didn't know what they was doing. Went back to the police station like, hey, they picked up my keys, my phone. What's going on? I guess the desk commander for the night called them. They didn't know anything about it. There was a lot of hell raising. My mother came down there. She was raising hell. And then eventually all our stuff was returned to us the next day. But the fact that, you know, you feel comfortable enough to basically come into our community, because even though we talk about the driving piece, Pete, the stuff that goes on with community policing might be far worse than driving while black. Under the umbrella of it's a certain type of neighborhood, X, Y, and Z, which is nonsense. I grew up in the neighborhood where my mother was a homeowner. I mean, and even if she wasn't, even if I was living in a housing project, which we did at one point, that doesn't give you carte blanche to come in there and treat me anything less than, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
But nonetheless, the fact that you would take us in on a bogus charge and not having our ID, and then you would go back and pick up our belongings and throw them in the trash. You know, and this is, let me see, 1997.
And so you were out of college. You were already an educator, and you were.
And even if we were like dudes on the corner, I wouldn't excuse it. But everybody that was out there, there was the guy who was a homeowner is a friend of mine. I won't say his name, but he was like a GS-10 in the government. There was educators. Everybody out there was working everyday Joes. Which is the odd thing is, Pete, that the police station in my community, when said cops got off work, they would drink on the street that ran off the police station in the community. So the same things that you're harassing me for, you do when you get off work, which anybody in most communities do. They grab a beer with their buddies. I mean, in most middle class communities.
So technically in DC, you're not supposed to drink beer in your own front yard?
So we were told. I guess yes. Because my mom did inquire about. Well, no, I actually inquired about a lawyer. You can't have an open container at that time. You couldn't have an open container of alcohol in public. It had to be in a brown bag or something to that effect.
I don't know how in the hell the front yard is public. That's private property, but that's
it's private property.
And I can tell you this, Coach. Never in my life have I heard of a white person over the drinking age, right? Y'all were not 16 years old. Y'all were over the drink. Never have I heard of a white person who was over the drinking age getting arrested for drinking peacefully on his own property. I've never heard a story like that from a white person in my entire life, ever.
So remember, I wasn't locked up for having an open container of alcohol. I was locked up for not having an ID on me, which was probably 100 yards away in my car.
I've also never heard of a white person getting arrested for not having an ID, nor have I ever heard of a white person refuse the opportunity to go to the car and get the ID that was 20 yards away. So everything you're saying right now, and this part of our problem, Coach, is that, and there's a reason I'm doing these videos, the experiences we all have with police officers as black human beings, it's so outside of our experience. We don't have stuff like that happen unless I've been pulled over, of course, doing 100 miles an hour in a 70, but I don't get pulled over doing 70 in a 70, ever. And so it's hard for us as white people to accept and believe all of these things happen because they don't happen to us. And so, again, there's the reason why I'm doing these videos, and I'm talking with white coaches as well. I'm doing another one of these with a white coach who texted 65 of his most recent black players, and 87% have been either non-violently harassed and unconstitutionally non-violently harassed or non-lethally brutalized. 87%. And these are 18, 19, 20. These are college kids, right? And so a lot of people will say, oh, that stuff doesn't happen anymore, or that stuff's just isolated. And that's an absolutely untrue narrative. And again, the reason why I'm doing these videos, we need people who want racial justice in this country. We have to bring the white moderates along for the ride. And as long as they think that doesn't happen anymore, as long as they think it's isolated, right? We need them to understand that the nonviolent harassment, which happens almost universally, I don't know hardly any adult black males who've never been non-violently, unconstitutionally harassed by the police. That's a key foundational element of the murders, right? If we turn a blind eye to that without making the connection between the two, we are really failing not just black people, but righteousness and our nation as a whole. And so I want to follow up with you, Coach, as we were just talking about the near universality of the problem, and I saw you shaking your head, so I think I know what the answer already is. But of your closest circle of black men, your closest circle of black male friends, what percentage of them have had an experience with either unconstitutional nonviolent police harassment or with violent but non-lethal police brutality?
I would venture to say, Coach Pete, anywhere between 98 to 100%. I mean, and I'm speaking of every margin of society. Brothers, guys that would, their situations would dictate that they are well-to-do, whatever. I could randomly call 75 guys on my phone, and I'm almost certain 99 to 100% of them have had some kind of occurrence where they felt like, or not what they felt, what is deemed as they were put in the situation that you're speaking of with regards to the police. They like, You know, it just is. I don't know if others understand that at some point it's almost like shaking a soda bottle, right? Like if you're shaking me all the time, if you're shaking a soda bottle, it eventually does what?
It blows up.
This is this. Like, you know, a lot of us have a lot of us have said, well, that's just how the police are. Um, but that's not acceptable. That's not. I mean, I know a lot of police that aren't like that, but that's neither here nor there. You know, if it's one police out there doing it and five police see him doing it, then six police got a problem then. Like that's just not that police's problem. That's the fact that five witnessed him do it. They didn't say anything. He did it. There's a black man dead. Nah, like it's so many problems on so many layers with that. But to go back to your question, a lot of those brothers, the majority of those brothers would tell you that they had those types of occurrences that I just talked about. And I will probably venture to say more times than not, it's been community policing, not driving while black. Not, you know, not it's almost like it's like it's been taught to certain police that this is how you police these people, black people in these communities. You have to be this type of way.
Well, and I would say that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but most of my black friends have had, I agree, their experiences have been worse in the community with police harassment and brutality. But most have had both. Most have been pulled over for being black in the wrong neighborhood or whatever you want to say, where they committed no moving violations. They just got stopped anyway. What are you doing in these parts? That type of thing. Most of them have had both, except that I again agree that most of the stories I'm hearing from my friends, there's a scale, right? And like getting pulled over unconstitutionally and harassed, you know, maybe that's a 3.5 in terms of severity. Whereas a lot of the stories I'm hearing in the community are more like 8s, 9s, and 10s in terms of severity. So what you're saying is the same thing I'm hearing a lot of different places. And then my last question, Coach, and I ask this on every one of these videos because it's the whole point of the video. You say between 90 and 100%, and you've changed that to 99 to 100%.
Yeah.
So it sounds almost like you don't want to say 100% because you don't want white people to disbelieve you. But the number might actually be literally 100%. And
no, it literally might be 100%, Pete. I'm saying that for the arbitrary one guy I might know who hasn't had that experience. Like,
so as far as you know, it's 100%, but possibly it's not. Right.
Yeah.
And so my question is, do you consider 100% to constitute isolated?
Not by the definition of isolation. Isolation is like a random one-time event, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I obviously agree. And again, the whole point of these videos is we need white people to understand that the protests are not only about the murders of unarmed black people, but about the connected non-lethal police brutality and non-violent police harassment. And that these three things collectively are experienced almost universally by black people, especially black men, and that universality is a long way away from quote unquote isolated. And what I keep trying to convince white people of is that let's not worry about the symptom, right? These protests, let's worry about the cause, right? Why are the protests occurring? It's poor public policy that focuses on symptoms instead of causes. And my thing to white people is that we can't have peace without justice, and we can't have justice without the silent majority of what Dr. King called the white moderates deciding to join the side of righteousness. You need their help We all need them to stop turning a blind eye to this stuff. And our nation needs it as well. So, Coach, I don't know if you got anything else to add, but I sure do appreciate you being willing to share your experiences.
No, I appreciate you asking me to speak, Pete. The only thing that I would add, first of all, our connection is through basketball. That's the initial connection, which has transcended basketball and led us to have talks that have impacted the kids and the young men that I work with. But I'll last leave you with, and I think we had this talk earlier. Basketball is our connection. And so I'll say a lot of guys that look like you, they have to figure out which side of the fence they're on. It's just not, it's not enough to say, put a tweet out. Like, you got to understand what's going on in those guys that you're recruiting community. And I'm using basketball because that's our connection or how we start. And if not, then say that and move on so we know what we're dealing with. But the needle has to move, and that the needle is only going to move if you and your fellow brethren like get involved in this fight with us. Like again, you can only shake a bottle enough before the cap explodes and soda spraying everywhere. And so you can either have it peaceful with Cabernet, or you can have it explode and soda be everywhere, which you're having in major cities and towns all over America. But you can't have both. You can't complain about both.
Coach, I've said this a lot, and I actually just tweeted it a minute ago because Drew Brees, I don't know if you saw that video, but he's continuing to say that kneeling during the anthem is disrespectful to the troops and the flag. And my thing there is that, okay, so if you're sincere about that, if that really is the deal, that I don't mind admitting that the first time Kaepernick took a knee, because when I was about 8 years old, I was at a Memorial Day service with my grandfather, who was a colonel in the Marine Corps, fought in World War II, just like Drew Brees' grandfather did. And I wasn't paying attention during the anthem. And I got knocked into the middle of the next week by a Marine Corps colonel grandfather. And from that moment, I was shaped into flag and the anthem is a very serious thing, a time to be. And so now, because I am who I am, I got over that initial. I was upset at Kaepernick for taking a knee for like 45 seconds, right? But I had that initial reaction. However, if you shift to, like, there's the Navy SEAL that convinced Cap to kneel instead of sit, right?
Exactly.
And so there are people out there who are sincere on the topic of flag and anthem. I don't want to dismiss them, but I always follow up when they go there. I say, okay, well, there are no flags and no anthems and no troops at Black Lives Matter protests, of which there have been over 2,500 in the last 4 years, and of which 8 or 9 have turned into property damage. Or I'm not talking about what's going on right now, but to this point.
Previously.
And I say, so if the flag and the anthem and the troops are the issue, there are no flags, no anthems, no troops at Black Lives Matter rallies and protests. So may I assume that you totally support the Black Lives Matter movement? Well, so far, I haven't met a white person who they'd say, well, that's different, right? They start moving the goalpost. And so I have a really hard time accepting the sincerity, especially of a non-veteran white person who insists it's about the anthem, the flag, and what I'll leave you with is, if you have a problem with all forms of protest that have a common theme, then it ain't the nature of the protest, it's the theme. And you need to look in your heart. I often ask these people, name a single Black-led protest against racial injustice since 1970 that you fully support. Well, of course, the reason I say 1970s, what they all want to say is Dr. King. Well, his method must not have been that right because we fucking murdered him, you know? So all these folks acting like they would have marched with King, but they're against Cap. Get all the way the fuck out of my face with that. If Dr. King's alive today, can anyone really look at me with a straight fucking face and tell me that MLK would be on Trump's side calling Cap a son of a bitch and would be against Kaepernick for taking a knee during the national anthem, right? Like, I mean, it's just a fundamentally preposterous view, and yet it's a very common view. So that's about all
I have just one question. It doesn't have to be answered now. You can't answer it, of course. To all your followers, anybody watching this, how often, just in general, do Americans get up and run and get a beer or a hot dog or a pretzel or to the bathroom during the anthem at sporting events?
It's extremely common. Extremely common.
Like that's the time to go do everything you need to do before the action gets started. But now all of a sudden, you're basically a son of a bitch if you're not like in full regale standing honoring the flag.
Well, the other thing, Coach, I don't know if you saw this or not, but Jerry Jones, very reluctantly, I might add, he didn't want to be there, but he had to give in and compromise a little bit. Jerry Jones went out with the entire team before kickoff, before the anthem, and they all took a knee.
They all took a knee.
It sounded like 75% of the crowd was booing their ass off. Well, now, wait a minute. I thought it was about the anthem and the flag and the troops, right? And the other question I always wondered is, if Tim Tebow had taken a knee during the anthem to protest abortion, would these people have been furious with him? I've always had my doubts. I've been very skeptical on that topic. You know, of course, that's a hypothetical. We can't know because he didn't take a knee. It's not a side-by-side comparison, but maybe it's relevant to this discussion. And I can tell you right now, I've always had my doubts on that topic.
I mean, whether people like it or not, absolutely not. But that's the privilege that comes with being a white man in America. You're held to a different standard. Again, we could go on and on with discussion, but at the end of the day, the reality is we weren't brought here to be equals anyway. And until people understand that, not my people, until people understand that we weren't brought here to be 50-50 in this, we're gonna continue to have these problems.
Yeah, well, you're right, and I'm hoping like hell that either these videos take off or that someone more prominent than I picks up the mantle of the Not Isolated Project, because I really do feel that if we can get the 80%, I think 10% of Americans or white Americans are KKK or KKK adjacent type of hardened racists. I think about 10% of white Americans are allies who are trying to help and have a better understanding of the real situation. And then 80% are what King called the moderates. And the unfortunate reality is that we can't do anything solution-wise politically without support from the white moderates. And because most of them are just too privileged to care, rather than having an evil heart toward black people. My optimistic hope is that if we can get the message to them that this stuff is not isolated, then maybe they would jump off the fence onto the right side. And maybe I'm being naive, but I feel like I got to fucking do something, you know?
I mean, from a black man to a white man, I appreciate the effort. You know, I could say other things, but you know, for lack of time, me and you can have that conversation. But again, I don't until white people understand that we weren't brought here to be equals, and until you deal with that, and then we move on, and then we move forward in terms of other things, we're going to continue to have these problems.
Coach, I really appreciate your time and your willingness to share your thoughts. And we will certainly continue the discussion offline as we would anyway.
Yes.
I appreciate you very much, brother. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
Cheers.